Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, November the 5th, 2021. Happy ABBA Day to everyone. But let's start off with the Battle of 29 Palms. This is from Portfolio Armor at Zero Hedge. In a recent training exercise in California, British Royal Marines beat their U.S. Marine opponents so soundly that the U.S. Marines asked for a mulligan halfway through the exercise. Afterwards, a Twitter spat about the exercise between a former U.S. Marine officer and a current U.S. Army officer planner rescue dog mom exposed some of the rot within the U.S. military. More on that below. But first, a quick correction on a previous post. No, we won't go into that. Yes, as the Daily Mail reported, Exercise Green Dagger ended in a humiliating result for the U.S. Marine Corps. Quote, Royal Marines commandos dominated U.S. troops and forced them into a humiliating surrender just days into a mass training exercise in the Mojave Desert, it has been revealed today. British forces took part in a 5-day mock battle at the U.S. Marine Corps' Twentynine Palms base in Southern California, one of the largest military training areas in the world, and achieved a decisive victory against their American counterparts. The Royal Marines, along with allied forces from Canada, the Netherlands, and the United Arab Emirates, destroyed or rendered inoperable nearly every U.S. asset and finished the exercise holding more than 65% of the training area after beginning with less than 20%. Seeing no opportunity for victory, American combatants asked for the exercise to be reset halfway through the 5-day exercise, having taken significant casualties from British commandos. In response to this news, former U.S. Marine artillery officer and current PhD student Josiah Lippincott shared the following tweet: "We need a total purge of American military leadership." Lippincott's tweet prompted a thread in response by a U.S. Army planner, a lieutenant colonel, who describes herself, she's on Twitter, and I don't know, she looks like a vegan mom. This person is called Nikki Dean, Nikki with 2 Ks, of course. When did Army officers start having stripper names? Her handle is at dominatrix_C2. She describes herself as Army planner, writer, researcher, pilot, adventurer, rescue dog mom, Ravenclaw, that's a Harry Potter reference, cocktail drinker, runner, stitching stuff. Okay, my doctrineistas, let's discuss this with actual references. First, context matters. This original twit doesn't account for context. He's ill-informed, to say the least, but he has an audience. This is from Nikki Dean, a.k.a. Dominatrix C2. Her cringeworthy use of amazeballs and a Taylor Swift gif shows this is no longer the army of Alvin York or Audie Murphy. Yes, this is what she had tweeted. That's Nikki Dean. Even better, our OP4 is so amazeballs that they will actually let you tag along for a battle period to see how they get into our decision cycle and defeat us so dang well, 2 exclamation marks. Lippincott responded with a thread pointing out that the U.S. military leadership needs to be purged, not just because of the failure at the training exercise, but because it doesn't win wars despite outspending its opponents by orders of magnitude and kills civilians in drone strikes with no accountability. Lippincott tweeted with regard to Dominatrix, aka Lieutenant Colonel Nikki, "This thread is trash, especially from someone who was a war planner by trade. So I understand why you didn't tag me in it, but that's fine. You can run, but you can't hide." Lippincott's whole thread is worth a read, but if you're pressed from time, we'll leave it on this note. That dominatrix nonsense is repulsive, but it makes sense. Of course, our war planners are more interested in LARPing as sex dungeon masters than actually winning wars. Of course, You know things are foobar when your leaders look like this. In a decent country, this woman would be a high school gym teacher, not opining about military strategy. And yes, I made the obligatory Seinfeld reference in my response to this picture. Hard feelings. What do you know about hard feelings? Ever had a man die in your arms? Ever kill somebody? No. Uh, Lieutenant Colonel Dean, the dominatrix, doesn't look like that. She certainly looks very gender liquid. I must admit, though. So if you go to Lieutenant Colonel Nikki Dean's Twitter page, you will find out that these tweets are protected. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. It appears her feelings were hurt. So more on this. This is from General J. Raymond, Space Force CSO. Every winning team needs a uniform. We started with the female design and then created the male prototype. I'm excited to share the new look with you today. And there's a picture of two Space Forcers. There's a white male on the left, and there is a black Hispanic female on the right. Significantly, the black Hispanic female has far more, about twice as much fruit salad on her chest as the feckless white man. And more from the female military. This is too good. This is just too good. Nail polish. I mean, I suppose you didn't really understand how important nail polish is to today's soldier. But let's let a general give us the lowdown. This is from Major General Joe Clybourne. Joe is a woman. Why the Army thinks a French manicure is an obnoxious color compared to the civilian world, which views it as an understated yet professional look, is beyond me. But I have to be in uniform tomorrow, so here we are. It looked nice while it lasted. And in the foreground, we see the Major General's hand, which has aluminum foil, the tips of all 5 fingers, presumably to protect the nail polish while it is drying. And on the right side of the picture, we see the legs of the Major General, and they are up on her desk. She is shoeless and sockless, showing off her pedicure and her red nail polish, presumably the forbidden color. Okay. And Major General Joe Clybourne describes herself as an Assistant Adjutant General MNNG and Deputy Commanding General CCOE-ARNG, following NRT's endorsement wife, soldier, lawyer, former state CIO, Disney fanatic, but of course, my little princess, I would bet, scuba diver and runner. Welcome to today's military. Now, we have a military crisis in my own country of Canada, and this is what the military crisis is. In the 1990s, Canada decided to allow women into the military, and now it's been discovered that if you have women officers working closely with male officers, they will have sex with each other. We have a whole host of just absolutely horrifying stories about women saying, oh, yes, I had an affair with a married man, my superior officer, and then he broke it off. I demand retribution. Yes, that's what the crisis in the Canadian military is, apart from some tail hook nonsense that a bunch of soldiers got rowdy on a ship sailors got rowdy on a ship in Greenland, of all places. And apparently there was some sexualization involved. Yeah, fancy that. Canadian general told me years ago when I wrote a cover story about the prospect of the Canadian military being sexually integrated. He said this is not for attribution, but he was speaking of the all-male military, and he said we have enough trouble with the sailors with the soldiers having sex with each other without bringing women into it. And in more military news, this is from Forbes. Craig Hooper, Navy faces prospect that crash will force USS Connecticut out of service. Despite a virtual news blackout, information on America's damaged Seawolf class attack submarine, USS Connecticut, is starting to leak out. While details are scarce, the Pacific Fleet's latest operational debacle has left the U.S. without a key undersea combatant. At a minimum, the USS Connecticut will be out of service for years, and there is a creeping realization that the damage may be significant enough to force the USS Connecticut into a premature retirement. It is time for the Navy to start talking. Regardless of the outcome, the fate of the USS Connecticut has enormous ramifications for virtually every facet of America's maritime industrial base. Given the extended news blackout and the fact that the submarine hasn't budged from Guam yet, indications suggest the USS Connecticut is badly hurt. This is no time to smother a potentially uncomfortable debate under an overclassified blanket. The USS Connecticut's mishap is a big deal and no longer a cozy internal matter. It would appear that the USS Connecticut managed to drive itself into a mountain. And I suppose this is the latest in embarrassments for the U.S. Navy. My favorite being the ship that crashed into another ship because two women on the deck were not communicating because she knows what she did. Yes, indeed. And here is a piece by William S. Lind at the American Conservative called Never Accountable. He begins, when I lived in Vienna in 1971, I rented a room in the elegant 20-foot ceilings downtown apartment of an elderly Frau Baron. In a country that had no crime, old ladies dared let rooms. Her father, a General von Krauss-Eislergo, was Archduke Franz Ferdinand's favorite soldier. When he failed as a division commander in Galicia in 1914 and was relieved of his command, his career did not suffer. He had protection. In the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you had to know someone very high up to get protection. America, fittingly, has democratized it. Now, as soon as you become a general or an admiral, you are covered. Lose a war? No problem. You will still retire with a six-figure pension and a lucrative position or contract with a defense company. Following the debacle of our withdrawal from Afghanistan, Army and Marine Corps officers from captain to colonel are demanding accountability. Their services have worse than egg on their faces, and they want to know why. Who botched it? If it was high-ranking civilians, what senior generals refused to go along? Did they put their stars on the table when they saw a disaster in the making? They are offered no answers because the demand for accountability goes up through colonel and then stops. From brigadier on, the attitude seems to be that of the Italian Army's chief of staff on the verge of World War II. He supposedly said, "When you have a plate full of pasta for life and a little wine, who cares about anything else?" To his credit, the commandant on the Marine Corps has announced that there will be a full critique of his service's performance during the withdrawal, but that should merely be the amuse-bouche of a 12-course meal. What about 20 years of failure that marked the rest of the lost war in Afghanistan? With the exception of General Stanley McChrystal, none of our top commanders tried anything beyond putting more firepower on more targets. That is apparently all the U.S. military can now do, and it guarantees defeat in fourth-generation wars with non-state opponents. Lind continues, there was an alternative. Around 2005, a seminar I led, made up of officers from all our armed services, plus the Royal Marines, Royal Swedish Marines, and Argentine Army, wrote and published a field manual for fourth-generation war, the FMFM-1A. Fittingly, we put it out as a manual of the Imperial and Royal Austro-Hungarian Marine Corps. And when one Army officer, the commander of the 1st Industry Division's Cavalry Squadron, put it into effect in Afghanistan, it worked. Violence dropped steadily in his sector while it continued to rise in sectors around him. Did a single American general ever read this document? I doubt it. Nor should the investigation and assignment of responsibility end with Afghanistan. The fact is, generations of American generals and admirals have blandly presided over an increasingly outdated and dysfunctional military. Only a handful have attempted reforms. In consequence, we now have a defense research, development, and procurement system so bureaucratic and complex, it cannot produce effective equipment at affordable prices. Our armed services' tailorist manpower systems compel careerism and focus our officers' attention inward on budget and bureaucratic politics. The manpower system is the reason we have so few militarily competent senior officers. It promotes only those marked by hesitance and unthinking acceptance of the rules of the game. The U.S. Navy is still structured to fight the aircraft carrier fleet of Imperial Japan long after the submarine became the capital ship. Our submarines are so expensive we cannot hope to build enough of them. The Army and Marine Corps remain mired in second-generation doctrine, the way of war developed by the French Army during and after World War I, which reduces man's most demanding game to putting firepower on targets. The Corps' last successful innovating commandant, General A.M. Gray, adopted third-generation maneuver warfare as Marine doctrine in the late 1980s, but Marines do not follow their own doctrine. Under the complacent mandarins who pass for America's senior military leadership, our armed forces have institutionalized the old definition of insanity, doing more of the same and expecting a different result. Do senior civilians in the Defense Department and the White House, along with Congress, share responsibility for 60 years of military failure? Yes, although in the late 1970s and early 80s, an attempt to address our deep-seated problems, the military reform movement, of which I was a part, arose from Capitol Hill and at times received support from some secretaries of defense. But the prime burden for military failure on and off the battlefield rests on those who commanded and still command our armed forces, the generals and admirals. The fact that their sins are more sins of omission than commission, just passing under their successors, the system they inherited, does not excuse them. In the real world, keeping a chair warm usually does not qualify someone for a six-figure pension. A few years ago, an Army lieutenant colonel ended his career by saying in print in Armed Forces Journal that a private who loses his rifle gets in more trouble than a general who loses a war. That statement is literally true. Until it is true no longer, we will keep on losing wars. And this is by William S. Lind in The American Conservative. William S. Lind is the author, along with Lieutenant Colonel Gregory Thiel, of the Fourth Generation Warfare Handbook. His most recent book is Retroculture, Taking America Back. Let's go to the chat. And hello to Emma Kelly's Earth, Anran, Dan, John S., Stan Allison. Dionysus says, Z-Man is good. His rant today was right on. It's funny that I started to see all things that we complain about on the right when I was apolitical, teaching the law, the hospitals, diversity. The far right just gave me the words to express what I was experiencing. That is why I know my political views are correct. Hello to Chogokin 666. Anran, Dawn from Beyond. Jonathan Pohl. Hello, Professor Pohl. He says, today I rode the tiger and did not fall off. Hello to Jonathan Ferguson, who announces I'd like to plug the rally tomorrow at 10 a.m. on Parliament Hill. Check Randy Hillier's Twitter feed for confirmation and more details. Hello to Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator. Thank you for your service. Dr. Deadname says they relieved the captain and the senior enlisted man as well as the sonar chief. This means there was probably some training issue or similar personnel issue. Yo Mama says a mountain. I saw this episode of Monk and adds bring back the old cavalry. Dr. Deadname continues, the new $13 billion Ford class carrier is years behind schedule, and it cannot carry the new F-35C it was intended for. David the Gnome says, whenever I think of the American military top brass, I'm reminded of that video of that woman, Kay, something from Virginia, who basically said all the higher-ups are, something bad. Okay, I'm not going to repeat that. Okay. So let's have Canada Corner. This story is infuriating enough to fill the hole. of Canadian corner. See, we have this province, Quebec, which has more powers than any other province. It gets more money than any other province, because if we stop keeping them, if we stop giving them perquisites that the rest of the provinces don't have, they might leave. Oh, well, for the sake of God, please go now. This is from Joan Bryden at the Canadian Press. Constitutional experts say the federal government has a bit of wiggle room to maintain Quebec's 78 seats in the House of Commons, or even add one or two, but it can't guarantee the province's influence in the chamber won't wane over time without a constitutional amendment approved by at least 7 provinces. Quebec Premier François Legault and the Bloc Québécois are both demanding that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau step in to ensure that Quebec does not lose one seat as the country's electoral map is redrawn to reflect population shifts. And they've gone further, contending that the House's recognition of Quebec as a nation in Canada demands that the province have a constant share of the seats in the Commons in perpetuity, even though its share of the country's population is declining. Legault said, I think the nation of Quebec deserves a certain level of representation in the House of Commons, regardless of the evolution of the number of inhabitants in each province. Under the current constitutionally entrenched formula for allotting seats, Chief Electoral Officer Stéphane Perreault has calculated that the number of seats in the Commons should increase by 4 to 342, including 3 more for Alberta, 1 more for Ontario, and 1 more for British Columbia, the 3 fastest growing provinces. Because Quebec's population has grown more slowly, at least in part because Legault's government has slashed immigration. Oh, boo-hoo, boo-hoo. Apparently the Premier of Quebec wants Quebec to remain French. What a bad man he must be. The real problem here is that the Quebecois have stopped having babies. To the extent that they have any population increase at all, it is because of immigrants. That is how feeble they have become for all of their putative nationalism. And have you heard about this thing called the Metaverse? Apparently it's a game changer. I hate that phrase, the game changer. And I still have to remind myself what it means, because when I hear this phrase game changer, I think, so they were playing baseball, but now they're playing football? Oh, no, it just means significant. Okay, that's what it means. It just means significant. But apparently the Metaverse is very, very significant. This appeared late last month from Patrick Knox in the New York Post. What is the Metaverse? Meaning explained. The concept of the metaverse is quickly becoming a buzzword in technology and business, which is being embraced by Facebook. But what does it mean? Here we explain. Metaverse is a broad term. It generally refers to shared virtual world environments, which people people can access via the internet. The term can refer to digital spaces, which are made more lifelike by use of virtual reality or augmented reality. Some people also use the word metaverse to describe gaming worlds in which users have a character that can walk around and interact with other players. There is also a specific type of metaverse which uses blockchain technology. In these, users can buy virtual land and other digital assets using cryptocurrencies. Many science fiction books and films are set in a fully fledged metaverses, alternative digital worlds, which are indistinguishable from the real physical world. But this is the stuff of fiction. Currently, most visual spaces look more like the inside of a video game than real life. Facebook Inc., under fire from regulators and lawmakers over its business practices, is planning to rebrand itself with a new name that focuses on the metaverse, The Verge reported. Fans of the metaverse see it as the next stage in the development of the internet. At the moment, people interact with each other online by going to websites such as social media platforms or using messaging applications. The idea of the metaverse is that we'll create new online spaces in which people's interactions can be more multidimensional, where users are able to immerse themselves in digital content rather than simply viewing it. The accelerated interest in the metaverse can be seen as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, it can be seen that way, but that's not really what's going on. As more people have started working and going to school remotely, there has been an increased demand for ways to make online interaction more lifelike. Okay. Really? I'm sure you're all familiar with this word meta. And maybe you come across it and you don't know what it means. Basically, it means one step removed, one step above. Instead of considering the thing, you consider the consideration of the thing. Yeah, that's what meta means. Because we don't want to waste time these days considering the thing. Let's just, what's the reaction to it? Let's consider that. Because going to primary sources, I suppose, is too hard for us these days. So I suppose the metaverse is a perfect expression of the way we live now. I'm looking at the Wikipedia entry for metaverse. Timeline of notable developments: 1978, MUDs and MOOs. 1993, the metaverse was a MOO operated by Steve Jackson Games. 1995, Active Worlds. 2003, Second Life. 2004, X3D. 2006, Roblox. 2018, Neos VR from SolarX. 2019, Facebook Horizon. 2020, Decentraland. 2021, Epic Games. 2021, Microsoft Mesh. There's much fun made in the HBO show Silicon Valley about Oculus and virtual reality. That this is it's just a way to burn a lot of money, to promise the world and deliver little. Because the explanation given, which is the common explanation, is that people are going to expect to use this virtual reality on their smartphone. And your smartphone does not have enough computer power. It's going to look terrible. And you will need a really substantially expensive rig in order to experience this, assuming they can get it to work. According to Wikipedia, a virtual environment is considered to be the most likely access point to the metaverse. The metaverse's dependency on VR technology places limitations on its development and wide-scale adoption. Limitations stemming from the balance between cost and design include the lack of high-quality graphics and a lack of mobility. Lightweight wireless headsets lack image quality, which is optimized for bulky wired VR goggle systems. Another issue for wide-scale adoption of the technology is the cost, with the HTC Vive Pro 2 headset costing $799 plus controllers in 2021. Many high-end computers are incapable of powering VR machines. In 2016, NVIDIA estimated that 99% of computers on the market were incapable of handling the software requirements for an adequate virtual reality experience. So, what is going to be the nature of this virtual reality? Of course, in Silicon Valley, it served as an excuse to deliver ads to you. Every time you said a word that was redolent of a product or activity or porn specialty, there it was on the screen. And the operator freaked out very quickly and said something like puppy dogs, rainbows, United Nations, in order to get all of the filth off the screen. But this is from the Washington Post, I believe. Yes, it takes a rosier view. What will the world look like when you can be whoever you want in the metaverse? You can be whoever you want in your imagination, and that takes no more than the technology of your brain. And everyone is assigned one of those at birth. And there's a graphic here of Mark Zuckerberg speaking to an avatar of himself. And there's some sort of broiler furnace, which is right near the water for some reason. And there is Mark Zuckerberg looking very much like a cartoon, wearing a skeleton jumpsuit. And he doesn't look real at all. But according to Stephen Zeitchik of the Washington Post, Their findings were startling. Not only would the user operate the avatar in a way consistent with its appearance in the digital world, but the avatar's characteristics would shape the user's behavior back in the real one. A person who chooses to be taller digitally becomes a more aggressive negotiator in daily life. Couldn't you achieve the same effect by making little stick men of your business rivals and then drawing a stick man as you, just towering over them? All you need for that, is a pencil or a pen and a piece of paper. Someone who dons an inventor's lab coat online is more creative at real-world meetings. Yeah, if you say so, Stephen. Adopting a character digitally, the researchers found, can essentially change your personality in a term that has come to be known as the Proteus effect. That phenomenon could become suddenly widely relevant with the advent of the Metaverse, the long fantasized ideal of a persistently virtual world that allows a limitless number of users to roam, play, learn, work, and yes, buy. Mark Zuckerberg last week outlined his vision and commitment by Facebook's newly christened parent Meta to spend billions over the next decade to build such a world. The company possesses a level of investment in consumer reach even highly successful virtual world firms like Roblox and Fortnite do not. Some greeted the announcement with justifiable skepticism. But according to Rabindra Ratan, associate professor in the Department of Media and Information at Michigan State University, a man who has researched wide-scale virtual interconnectedness, when it comes to the metaverse, the headline should be haters gonna hate. The reality is that there are all kinds of reasons to be optimistic about this world. There will be badness too. I just think it will be a new kind of badness. That's what we need. That's what's missing in today's world. More ways to be bad. How to be bad digitally. But don't you have Grand Theft Auto and other games if you want to be bad digitally? Hearing about the metaverse can, as a popular Instagram account suggested last week, make us feel like the listeners in that Charlie Day bulletin board meme, bombarded by a lot of theories that mean little except the potentially imminent institutionalization of the person offering them. It's an understandable reaction and maybe partly due to hearing someone sell us a whole world instead of simply talking about a piece of it or building those elements one at a time. After all, when current internet fiefdoms were constructed, billions of us were not subjected to an all-encompassing pitch 10 years in advance. Well, okay. So as I mentioned, this picture from Facebook of virtual Mark Zuckerberg looks like a cartoon. So I suppose that they could make it more realistic, but then you run into the uncanny valley effect, which is death. With the millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, which are spent on, in Marvel movies, say, for CGI, and other studios as well, it's not very realistic in depicting motion. Fire always looks fake in CGI, and CGI is incapable of bringing across the understanding of heft, of weight. And this is after billions and billions and billions have been spent on this. What is apparently the idea this is supposed to be integrated into the business world, that people are going to be appearing in business meetings in their avatars? So is there going to be an arms race where everyone is, like the men are going to turn themselves into versions of the Hulk or that character in the MCU who killed everyone in that movie? And the women, are they all going to be Disney princesses? Is that how it's going to work? Or the women, some of them are going to be, kick-ass babes? Yeah. Let's assume that this could work. Let's assume that it was technologically feasible and delivered an actual virtual reality. What would be the result? Well, of course, how many people is like the holodeck in that Star Trek was The Next Generation? The show seemed to skirt around the fact that if a holodeck existed, it would become a sex dungeon. I also see the possibility that people could construct virtual worlds for themselves. For instance, hey, remember when I was 17 and life seemed like so much fun and the possibilities were limitless? I want to create a world of, with the buildings and all that and how people talked in those days and the way they dressed. I want to take myself back to when I was 17, when I was happy, or at least thought I was happy. How many people do you think would enter a world like that and never want to leave? A great many people, I believe. Is that a good thing? Are we not already atomized enough? Let's go back to the chat. Oh, Chad Chatson says NPCs are already in the metaverse. Okay. Hello, Popcasso88. David the Gnome says all of Canada belongs to Quebec. It is their divine right to rule over Anglo-Canada. Yo Mama says at least old man Trudeau had the balls to declare martial law. Would Princess Rockstar use force to keep Quebec? No, it's not going to happen. A fool like Andrew Coyne, said of the 1995 referendum, oh no, it's not going to be permitted. Oh, really? Really? Can you imagine Colonel Coyne sitting there wearing a tin hat at some, checkpoint Charlebois? Never going to happen. Never going to happen. Can you imagine a Ready Player One style HR meeting? What an incredible futuristic world we're living in, says David. Dr. Dead Name says this is a lame dystopia. Dan says transhumanism never sounded so good. Oh yes, Chogakin 666, the Internet of Things is in the metaverse, and there's a game changer, y'all. If you notice that you're not hearing very much at all about the Internet of Things, that turned out to be a damp squib. Gamian says dead online ersatz life. Chogakin 666 says the Fetaverse is a chain of Greek restaurants. That's pretty good. Oscar Toscas, can you buy a ballpark hot dog in the metaverse? Hello to William Hicks. Oscar Toe says, my luck, I'd go into the metaverse and Kata would come up smiling at me in that pork pie hat. Does he wear a pork pie hat? Really? Okay. Hello to Dan Ellison. William Hicks says Dangerfield's Easy Money is on at 4.2 Detroit. Forgot what a funny movie that is. Come on down. I am the man. I am bad. I'm so bad I should be in tension, says Julio to Dangerfield's daughter. David says that's just like how Second Life was. Everyone was fat and dumpy in real life, but all the avatars look like strippers and gigolos. I remember that the character in The Office, John Krasinski played, it turned out he kept it secret from Pam, but he had a Second Life existence where he had like pixie-like hair, and he had a Stratocaster slapped to his back, and he could fly. Will shutting down the oil sands hasten the breakup of Canada, says Palcasso 88. I don't know whether it even go that far. Okay. Because I predicted I don't think that Canada is going to make it to 2030. It's bankrupt. The government's bankrupt, and the provinces are bankrupt. Let's see what Dr. Bruce Charlton has to say. When get woke, go broke is the plan, self-correcting negative feedback systems don't apply when demons are running the world. We're all finding it difficult to get to grips with this new post-global totalitarian world administered ultimately by demonic powers and their mindless human hosts, servants, and slaves, because it operates on the basis of an inverted value system, which is not a natural way for us humans to think. The difference is that, unlike men, demonic powers are motivated by the desire to destroy whatever is good, whatever is God's creation. For instance, the pandemic response, including the mandatory PEC program, has led to major sections of the economy of national functioning of essential provisions being in increased danger of being rendered useless or even destroyed. This makes the nations weak, impoverished, increasingly chaotic. This is negative feedback, indicating that what is being done is doing harm and that we need to stop doing it. Normally, negative feedback would lead national rulers to stop doing it, but these times are not normal. When the global rulership is under demonic control, such negative consequences are regarded as a good thing. Since the demonic powers desire to destroy God's creation and everything good, they are delighted by evidence of increasing national weakness and by the increasing sufferings and death of human beings. For demons, what we humans regard as negatives are in fact the plan. The climate change agenda likewise. The in-place anti-good global strategy against carbon, the chemical of life, and CO2, the gas of life, makes perfect sense from the, to us humans, inverted anti-life perspective of demons whose existence is as unembodied spirits. The phrase go woke, go broke will be true in the long term. Wokeness is anti-functional, destructive of its nature. So even though explicit corporate wokeness is expedient for those managers who implement it, expedient by a short time scale of weeks or months, which is why convergence happens everywhere, nonetheless, accelerating wokeness always and necessarily leads to destruction of institutions. The utterly ineffectual pseudo-attempts to control supposedly rising global temperature when global temperature cannot be predicted, cannot be controlled, and should not be controlled have, like the pandemic, created and sustained global totalitarianism and are destroying the world economy. This predictably and inevitably leading to starvation, disease, violence, and giga-death, i.e. the death of billions of humans, a situation not possible until the colossal population growth of the 20th century and continuing. Yes, I keep pointing this out with regard to the climate extinction rebellion people, and also with the deep greens. Oh yes, let's tear down the industrial world. What do you think is keeping alive all those people in Africa and Asia? Yeah, that's right. It's the system we have. If the system gets torn down, I don't know, people in North America will revert to living standards of what, circa 1900, say, or maybe earlier than that. And there will be a Malthusian die-off everywhere else in the world. Charlton continues, but what seems like pretty obviously negative feedback from our human perspective, i.e. the death of billions, is regarded as positive and desirable from the demonic standpoint. The demonic agenda explicitly includes the ideal aim for billions of men to die. What they don't say is that they intend that these billions should die in a condition of resentment, fear, and despair, die denying the spiritual realm, including the reality of their souls, cursing God, and rejecting the eternal life offered by Jesus Christ. Yeah, I mean, when you see that Swedish teenager with the superpower screaming blah 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 and how dare you, I mean, the malevolence of this woman should be apparent to all, but no, she's a heroine. She is the greatest heroine that has ever been. I noted elsewhere, I don't think that it's a coincidence, that the 1980s were characterized by the terror of so-called nuclear winter. We had Dr. Helen Caldicott and others. Destruction porn. Oh my God. Millions, hundreds of millions of people writhing and dying in agony, you know, and once it starts, it's all over. And Ronald Reagan is somehow to blame. Well, as it turned out, Ronald Reagan was a peace president. He wanted peace. And he got peace. And he basically managed to get the Soviets to surrender without America giving up anything. Quite an accomplishment. So the nuclear winter scare was over. Oh dear, what are these people going to do without the belief that we are sinful? Not personally sinful, because that would be religion, and religion is for stupid people, but collectively sinful. How about global warming? As soon as nuclear winter scare dies, global warming shoots up. Oh, we're all going to die. Oh, yeah, we know, nuclear winter. No. Oh, really? How are we going to die now? The Earth's getting warmer. Yeah, and, well, pretty soon the Earth is going to be terraformed into like Venus. What, really? You expect people to believe that? This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. Rand Paul accuses Fauci of using smarmy word salad to cover up his lying. Following another intense clash between Anthony Fauci and Rand Paul at a hearing Thursday, the senator later declared that, quote, no amount of smarmy word salad will get Fauci out of the fact that he lied before Congress, unquote. Appearing on Fox News after the hearing, Paul noted that, quote, the NIH has admitted that gain-of-function research funded by their agency took place at the Wuhan labs, but that Fauci won't admit it because I think he then thinks he'll have some sort of moral responsibility for the pandemic. Paul further reiterated, or repeated, that Fauci changed the definition of gain-of-function on the NIH website, a point that he confronted Fauci with at the earlier hearing and which Fauci denied. Paul said, it sounds like a bunch of government doublespeak. He doesn't get it. He hasn't learned anything from this, and he doesn't want to take any responsibility. He's been the number one advocate for gain-of-function research and now acts as if, oh, it doesn't exist and we never did it, but they just changed the definition, sort of like flushing it down the memory hole. Paul further urged that Fauci is trying to redefine the definition of gain of function, noting he's using a sort of smarmy word salad to try to get around the fact that it happened. In an op-ed published by Fox, Paul said defining away a gain of function research by saying it doesn't exist unless you know in advance it will occur is the very essence of hubris. Of vaccine mandates, he said, I think they are unlawful and unconstitutional. We need to take them to court, and people need to stand up and resist. I will point out to those people who may not know that Rand Paul is not some uneducated yahoo. Far from it. He is a physician who specialized in eye surgery. So, clever man. Perhaps not as clever as permanent bureaucrat Anthony Fauci. And Aaron Rodgers, oh dear, he's in such big trouble. The media, the jock sniffers in the sports media world are so angry with him that I'm almost persuaded they're going to stop dropping hints about his sexuality, which they never would have dared to do previously. This is by Zoe Kristen Jones at CBS News, and it reads like a series of government press releases, slightly rewritten and then cobbled together. This is Pravda-worthy stuff. Green Bay Packers quarterback Aaron Rodgers confirmed he's unvaccinated just days after testing positive for COVID-19. In a new interview, Rodgers, 37, lashed out at the media, the NFL's rules on COVID-19 testing, and said he consulted with podcaster Joe Rogan for alternatives to the vaccine. Quote, I realize I'm in the crosshairs of the woke mob right now, so before my final nail gets put in my cancel culture casket, I think I'd like to set the record straight on so many of the blatant lies that are out there about myself right now, unquote. This was in an interview with the Pat McAfee show. I believe strongly in bodily autonomy and the ability to make choices for your body, not to have to acquiesce to some woke culture or a crazed group of individuals say you have to do something. Health is not a one-size-fits-all. After testing positive, Rodgers will miss Sunday's game against the Kansas City Chiefs. He's now required to sit out team activities for the next 10 days. Rodgers said he began feeling symptoms Tuesday, tested positive Wednesday, and had one difficult day before feeling better Friday. After speaking with Rogan, he began taking several unproven remedies to fight COVID, including ivermectin, a drug typically given to animals to fight off parasites. Boo! The developers of ivermectin won the Nobel Prize because parasites in humans are endemic in many parts of the world, and ivermectin has proven highly efficacious of ridding people of parasites. But no, it's an animal. It's horse paste. Horse paste. The CDC has issued multiple warnings against using ivermectin to treat COVID-19, which can cause nausea and vomiting to more severe seizures, coma, and death in the event of an overdose. Poison control centers across the country have seen an increase in calls related to ivermectin calls since the drug became popular. Yeah, you've seen this repeated many, many times. Oh, people call poison control centers because someone calls and says, I or my wife took a bunch of horse paste and now he or she's feeling really sick. No, these calls to the poison control centers were along the lines of, I don't know, I'm hearing about this this new drug, not a new drug, but could be useful, against the row. Is it safe? Yeah. Rogers also discussed his comments from August when he said he'd been immunized. He said he'd taken a homeopathic immunization protocol advised by a medical team. Rogers also expressed skepticism in the COVID-19 vaccine, citing unproven claims they could affect fertility. The claim, which was echoed in September by rapper Nicki Minaj, has been flagged as misinformation by the CDC. Hey, you remember the media has done like a 180 on Nicki Minaj. Remember, like, her disgusting WAP appearance? Maybe her disgusting appearance at the MTV Awards or whatever? Just pushing that envelope. We just love Nicki Minaj. She is just showing up how puritanical and, how anti-Black America is. So then she says something about COVID-19. That woman, that horrible woman, why doesn't she just go away forever? Yeah. Now, Aaron Rodgers did say he'd been immunized, and he lied about that, which was a bad thing, a wrong thing for him to have done. Very much so. And I don't know to what extent he's going to be punished for this. But I wish he just, stuck to his guns and said it's no one's business instead of lying. And see if there's anything from this Substack that I can quote from. And yes, can we all agree watching woke sports Twitter lose its collective mind over Aaron Rodgers is hilarious? Worrisome paper about the spike protein's impact on DNA and DNA repair. Moderna and BioNTech stocks have both been crushed this week. And this piece from AB, Ireland, 75% COVID vaccinated, 90+% of adults. Alabama, 44% vaccinated. Alabama's COVID numbers getting better. Hospitalizations down 85% since September. That's of October 30th. Meanwhile, in Ireland, coronavirus, 3,174 new cases as Holohan urges people to reduce close contacts. Again, this is inexplicable because the experts have told us what to do. And the firm position of the Cripsis Cast is that the experts are always right. Science is evolving, constantly evolving. It evolves often from century to century or from decade to decade, from year to year, month to month, week to week, sometimes even day to day. But the experts are always right because it's science. And woe betide those who step outside the narrative. And of course, they deserve it because they've spoken out against the experts. This is Paul Joseph Watson from Summit News. A doctor who was banned by the General Medical Council from discussing COVID-19 on social media after making claims about masks has taken his case to the High Court in London. A social media ban was a condition imposed on Dr. Samuel White's registration with the GMC after he posted a video to Instagram and Twitter in June. A social media ban. We're seeing more and more of this. Apparently, doctors no longer have free speech rights. And this is a piece from patriots.win. And it's a sad story told on Twitter. This is from Emily Jo at EEKY Mom. Responding to Josh Rubin, MD, who had tweeted, "I'm an anesthesiologist and all 5 of my little gingers will be vaccinated as soon as they're eligible." She responded, May 8th, "I'm a teacher with a few science degrees. All 3 of my kiddos will be vaccinated as soon as they are able." And she tweeted on May the 12th, "My 14-year-old got his first COVID vaccine today. We are so thankful." And then there's a little emoji of a vaccine. Or of a hypodermic needle, actually. On June 24th, Emily Jo tweeted, "My son was one of the unlucky ones, and he developed myocarditis after his second dose. He was monitored in the hospital for 3 days. I'm not making light of it, and I can't pretend to know what pain he felt. However, I asked him if he is still happy to be vaccinated. His answer was a resounding yes. My younger 2 children will also be vaccinated when eligible. I am much more fearful of the Delta variant and MS-C. Severity is being adequately conveyed. I had no idea that mild meant 4 days in the hospital and cardiology visits for the indefinite future. Different issue, I guess." On June the 23rd, Emily Jo tweeted, "I have to pay for my son's hospital bill and endless cardiology follow-ups because he got post-vaccine myocarditis. That's not free." The next day, she tweeted, "Twitter is brutal. From the beginning, I have advocated for vaccination as I believe it's a way to control this pandemic. However, when I share that my son got myocarditis from his vaccine, I get blocked. I'm sorry, my son's AE doesn't fit your agenda." On July 25th, she tweeted, "My son's hospital bills are starting to roll in from his vaccine-induced myocarditis. This is just the first of many and only one of his consults. I imagine we will owe thousands just dealing with the acute phase of myocarditis. This does not account for his follow-up visits, echoes, EKGs, MRIs, stress tests, troponin levels, etc. It's very disheartening that the vaccine safety is touted to the public at every turn. But you know about when it's not safe, like in my son's case, those experts and officials now bear zero responsibility financially or otherwise. The burden is all on us, physical, mental, and financial." And on July 27th, Emily Jo tweeted, "My son's new shirt came for immunity and all I got was myocarditis and a mask." And finally, on October the 8th, Emily Jo tweeted, "I used to shame people for not getting vaccinated until my son was hospitalized with vaccine-induced myocarditis. Life has a way of humbling you." Indeed, it does. And let's go to William Briggs, statistician, to the stars. Dictators dictate. That's what they do. A dictator that did not dictate, did not make his word law, is no kind of dictator at all. Why, a dictator that did not force his captive subjects to follow his will is no better than a politician. Luckily, the people telling Biden what to say are genuine dictators. We therefore must give them the respect to which they are due. Of course, dictators have dictated that employers with 100 or more employees must force their employees to be vaccinated or to fire those employees. Or if not fired, to require them to wear a mask in perpetuity and to be tested weekly in perpetuity. Yeah. And what happens, you stupid midwit, soy-infused bunch of nature self-satisfied experts, when the test comes back positive? No, I'm asking you. What happens with a positive test? What? They have no answer. Oh, our delightful government doesn't torture its own citizens, only filthy foreigners? That's what you think. Think again. They lock the January 6th protesters in dungeons and inflict torture on them so bad even lefty judges take pity on the prisoners. But you don't have to worry about this, citizen. You weren't there. You weren't a political prisoner. Yes, just keep refusing the vaccine and see what happens. There is a dictate. The word, Biden's word, is now law. You must obey. You cannot disobey. You must comply. You have no choice. There is no appeal. Experts have spoken. Congress say the Constitution writes laws. Presidents do not. Yet this one does. This president has dictated a law. incredibly stupid law that will do nothing to solve the problem the government created. I've been telling you we are an expertocracy, that the old ways are dead, and this is proof of it. Will you sit and wait for Amy Coney Barrett to save you? She is already now, I predict, writing why she cannot do anything, trying to craft her phrases just so for some new book deal which she patiently awaits. Neil Gorsuch is your hope? The man who was convinced that sex meant sexual orientation? There is no one coming to save you. The rule of law is dead, applied only to you, and has been deemed you have disobeyed. Our rulers do not subject themselves to their own dictates. And, I'll get to that a little later, the supply chain crisis. But right now, I want to stay on topic and stay on topic with, okay, we'll go to Lockdown Skeptics. And just give me a second here. And here we are. And some strange news. Strange news. Daily COVID cases fall 22% in a week to 34,029. That is in England. Oh, more here on the COVID outbreaks in Belgium, Austria, and Ireland, in spite of having restrictions such as mask mandates and vaccine passports in place. Californian town, that would be Oroville, declares itself a constitutional republic to oppose the state's COVID laws. Death of the NHS COVID Pingdemic app. Yeah, the app responsible for England's hated Pingdemic is on the brink of death. According to experts, NHS data showed usage is up to 180 times lower than it was. And no way of knowing whether Scotland's vaccine passport scheme reduces transmission, says Deputy First Minister. Infection rates more than twice as high in the vaccinated. New UK HSA data shows as agency dismisses own data as biased. How about that? The latest UK HSA vaccine surveillance report was released Thursday, and its authors are now bending over backwards to keep their critics happy. Following a telling off this week from the UK Statistics Authority, the UK HSA's head of immunization, Mary Ramsey, published a blog post explaining what they've done to appease their detractors, while the report now states no fewer than 4 times, twice in bold typeface, that, quote, these raw data should not be used to estimate vaccines' effectiveness, unquote. Ramsey grovels, to make our data less susceptible to misinterpretation, the UK Health Security Agency has worked with the UK Statistics Authority to update some of the data tables and descriptions in the report, specifically around rates of infection in vaccinated and unvaccinated groups. In our commitment to transparent and clear data, we regularly review our publications to ensure they reflect the current situation within the pandemic, and we will continue to work with our partners at the statistics bodies to ensure our reporting is as scientifically robust as possible. As I noted this week, Will Jones writes, the UK HSA does not accept the criticism of its population estimates leveled by, among others, David Spiegelhalter, who declared that using them was deeply untrustworthy and completely unacceptable. The agency instead takes the view that the problem is systemic biases in the data, which mean it should not be used to estimate vaccine effectiveness. But as I have noted repeatedly, those biases just mean that the estimate will be of unadjusted vaccine effectiveness, which is a perfectly legitimate quantity to estimate and has its uses, particularly when looking at trends or when there is reason to think the biases may be relatively small. Yes. So it's the science, and science is based on data, right? What else could it be based on? Infection rates more than twice as high in the vaccinated, but that's bias. Ignore that. Ignore that data. Just ignore it. You better ignore it, or else. And let's talk about something a little different. let's talk about the supply crisis in the United States. Apparently, California is not very good at getting things in and out. Who could have guessed? There's a picture. This is from moonofalabama.org. A reference to a Bertolt Brecht song. The picture, a sign at the entrance to Denny's. Due to nationwide supply chain shortages, some of our products may be temporarily unavailable. We apologize for any inconvenience. Thank you for understanding. Whenever I see that line, thank you for understanding, I'm reminded of something that I'm trying to remember the name of this woman, this Jewish essayist who was very popular in the 70s and 80s. Fran, oh man, how could I forgot her name? Not Leibowitz, but she wrote once, "Don't thank me for not smoking because I'm not going to not smoke." Anyway, by now it is obvious to everyone that the U.S. has a supply chain problem. The highly optimized lean transport chain from producers to consumers has clogged up. This is a consequence of the two shocks the pandemic has caused in consumption patterns. Orders dropped hard at the start on the pandemic when people went into lockdown. A second shock came when consumption recovered to a higher than ever level. The higher consumption was not for services, as restaurants were often still closed. Instead, the money went into buying things that are produced elsewhere. Any lean supply system without reserves and redundancies will break down under such impulses. The supply chain has many critical points. Producers in Asia need containers to ship their goods. The containers must go to harbors. Ships must be available as well as loading capacity. The harbor at the receiving end must have capacity to unload the containers and to store them. Trucks must be available as well as container trailers. The goods then go to distribution centers where there must be capacity to repack them and send them out again. The empty containers must travel back to their origin to get filled again. All these levels need people capable and willing to work. If one element of the chain reaches its maximum capacity and clogs up all the others, they will be affected. Meanwhile, demand for goods continues to be strong. More goods are still coming in, while every element of the system that still had reserves is clogging up too. The supply chain from Asia to the U.S. has reached that point. Other global supply chains are also straining from side effects of the pandemic and may well clog up too. One major problem is that U.S. harbors on the West Coast, even before the pandemic, were already the least efficient of the world. In a review of 351 container ports around the globe, Los Angeles was ranked 328, behind Tanzania's Dar es Salaam and Alaska's Dutch Harbor. The adjacent port of Long Beach came in even lower at 333, behind Turkey's Nemrut Bay and Kenya's Mombasa. The group said in their inaugural Container Port Performance Index published in May. The total number of ships waiting to unload outside the two adjacent ports hit an all-new time record of 100 Monday. Americans' purchases of imported goods have jumped to levels the U.S. supply chain infrastructure can't handle, causing delivery delays and snarls. Government control, 24/7 operations, and automation help may make many non-U.S. ports more efficient. Southern California port executives are coaxing terminal operators, importers, truckers, railroads, dock workers, and warehouse owners to adopt 24/7 operations in a bid to clear clogs that have backed up dozens of ships offshore and delayed deliveries to stores and e-commerce fulfillment centers. Describing the problems at every level of the U.S. supply side of the supply and distribution chain, Ryan Johnson, a 20-year truck driver, explains why going 24/7 will not help and why the problems will get worse. Truck drivers have to sleep at least once in a while. They also have to make money. They get paid by the load, not for the time it takes them to load it, drive it from A to B, and unload it. If there are hours-long lines for loading and unloading, the work is simply unprofitable. And one truck driver says, so when the coastal ports started getting clogged up last spring due to the impacts of COVID on business everywhere, drivers started refusing to show up. Congestion got so bad that instead of being able to do 3 loads a day, they could only do 1. They took a 2/3 pay cut, and most of these drivers were working 12 hours a day or more. While carriers were charging increased pandemic shipping rates, none of those rate increases went to the driver wages. Many drivers simply quit. However, while the pickup rate for containers severely decreased, they were still being offloaded from the boats, and it's only gotten worse. The blog writer continues, the U.S. once had a well-regulated transport system, but that has long since been neoliberalized to death. The system will not unclog itself because the incentives are set all wrong. The people who have an interest in removing the blocks are the freight buyers and sellers. But the container owners, harbors and distribution centers and freight carriers are now simply increasing their prices for prioritized goods without delivering more capacity. They can even ask for penalties from those who have containers stuck in their system. They refuse to pay more for their workers and drivers and to hire and qualify additional ones. It will take some strong political initiative or a lot of time to rearrange and unclog the current system. The political initiative is simply not there. The Biden administration guy who is responsible for the issue says he cannot do anything. U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg predicted Sunday that supply chain issues plaguing multiple industries at the moment are going to continue as long as the coronavirus pandemic does, which means it could be forever. Confronted about the supply chain issues by Fox News' Chris Wallace, including the fact that standstills at the Port of Los Angeles have only worsened after it began operating on a 24/7 basis, Buttigieg could only say that businesses should expect relief from the issues when the pandemic ends, as the problems are a direct result of the virus's strain on the world. He said, quote, fundamentally, it's up to the producers, the shippers, and the retailers, and we're doing everything we can to help them move those goods across the infrastructure that's often outdated, unquote. But judges' can't-do attitude will have political consequences. The supply chain crisis will continue well into next summer and fall. Discussing Ryan Johnson's piece, Eve Smith remarks, the severity of the supply chain crisis combined with the near certainty that the only actor that can partially, stress partially, clear this logjam is the feds. They're guaranteed not to do enough, even if they understood how the moving parts interconnect. So it is now a safe bet that Democrats will suffer a wipeout in the midterms, even if Biden gets his big bills passed, some stimulus, and there is no COVID surge. Worsening supply shortfalls, particularly of drugs and medical staples, will make the bad press of the Iran hostage crisis look tame. Yes, we're the government, and we can't do anything. Isn't that what Joe Biden has been saying since he became president? Well, when he's campaigning, the government can solve all problems. Well, here's a problem. You got container ships backed up off the coast of California, and we're not getting our stuff, and the prices are rising. Well, there's nothing we can do about that. It's the plague. The plague! Too funny. Too funny. I was talking yesterday about food being one of the few things that has improved during my lifetime, but that it was distressing to see that food had become fetishized. There's a piece by Aquino Cure, this blog Face to Face, Culinary Wokeness as Imperialist Tastemaking. As the preeminent scholar on wokeness, it's my job to weigh in on the topic whenever there's an interesting new angle to explore. Recall the fundamental theme that wokeness is a necessary outgrowth of imperialism, suited to that stage of the empire's lifespan when it has reached its plateau for conquering foreign peoples and now needs to integrate them, especially their elites, into the core of the empire in order to administer a sprawling multicultural polity. Ethnic suprematism motivates the core during its expansion stage, why they should conquer other groups, while cultural pluralism attends its integrating the conquered stage, why they should encourage all their subjects to get along. See the endless historical examples, including polytheism in the Roman Empire and the millet system in the Ottoman Empire. The process of multicultural integration does not, however, extend to all foreign groups. It excludes those who have not been conquered and is outright hostile to those who control a rival sphere of geopolitical influence. It is imperialist, not universalist. This makes members of these excluded groups natural recruits to the cause of anti-wokeness, as detailed in this post on the ethnic composition of the anti-woke left. Yes, so how about Iran? Is there much of a call for Iranian food in the United States? No, because Iran has never been part of the Western sphere is now actively hostile to it. Kinokure continues, over the past week, there's been an insane overreaction to an innocuous remark by Swedish poster Tinksorg on Twitter, which praised Nordic cuisine and lamented that Muslims could never enjoy some of it, such as the dish of root mash and ham hock. You could imagine all the typical libtard reactions, racist, xenophobic, Islamophobic, etc. But also, how dare you praise Swedish cuisine? It's so terrible, tasteless, and disgusting compared to the delicious cuisine of Muslim peoples. He points out that the Swedes not only refuse to join NATO, but do not use the euro currency. They're resisting political, military, and economic integration into our empire's European region. So F them and F their whole culture. And he gives a list. For instance, there's a mania for the cuisine of Anglo-imperial ally Morocco, and to a lesser extent our client state of Egypt, but not Libya, which it resisted incorporation into our sphere of influence. Indeed, there's more of a presence of Ethiopian cuisine in America, and they're Christian rather than Muslim, but they have not defied joining our sphere of influence, so yay them. There's a mania for the cuisine of Lebanon, operated here, that's the United States, primarily by Christians, not Muslims, and to a lesser extent Israel, also not Muslim, our most reliable allies in the Levant, but not Palestine and definitely not Syria, which has been part of the Russian sphere of influence in the Levant. I see plenty of imported food from Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, and even the UAE, all allies in the Walmart and TJ Maxx ethnic food sections. Doner kebab is widespread in the German region of the Anglo Empire, not to mention all the Indian restaurants and the Indian section at every grocery store, including items that are made in India itself. Russian cuisine will never be a trend in the Anglosphere, but neither will the cuisine of the Caucasus nor the Central Asian former Soviet states, a large portion of whom are Muslim. And, oh yes, where's John Durham? We heard a lot about that. We've been hearing a lot about that for a long time. Here's a story of Eric Tucker, Associated Press. A Russian analyst who contributed to a dossier of Democratic-funded research into ties between Russia and Donald Trump was arrested Thursday on charges of lying to the FBI about his sources of information, among them a longtime supporter of Hillary Clinton. The case against Igor Danchenko is part of Special Counsel John Durham's ongoing investigation into the origins of the FBI's probe into whether Trump's 2016 campaign and Russia had conspired to tip the outcome of that year's presidential campaign. What? Stole the election? But we know that it's impossible for elections to be stolen in the United States. If you say that on social media, you'll be banned. Except if, say it about Trump. The indictment, the third criminal case brought by Durham and the second in a 2-month span, is likely to boost complaints from Trump allies that well-connected Democrats work behind the scenes to advance suspicions about Trump and Russia that contributed to the FBI's election year investigation. The case does not undercut investigators' findings that the Kremlin aided the Trump campaign, conclusions that were not based on the dossier, which was barely mentioned in Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report. You know how Russia stole the election in 2016? Some Russians bought some Facebook ads. Yeah. You didn't know it was that easy, did you? They're not going to let go of this. They are simply not going to let go. I've been quoting a line by Lenin a lot lately, and I'm going to go back to it again. Accentuate the contradictions. This is by Steve Watson from Summit News. MSNBC continued to slander Virginia's first black lieutenant governor Thursday, declaring her to be a ventriloquist for white supremacists. After her victory Tuesday, Winsome Sears called out MSNBC host Joy Reid, challenging the host to a debate and demanding a halt to the use of race-baiting rhetoric without allowing recourse. Reid has continued to attack Winsome, however, bringing on a leftist professor who boldly proclaimed that, quote, to have a blackface speaking on behalf of a white supremacist legacy is nothing new, unquote. Michael Eric Dyson further described Sears as, quote, a black mouth moving but a white idea running on the runway of the tongue of a figure who justifies and legitimates the white supremacist practices, unquote. A black mouth moving but a white idea running on the runway of the tongue of a figure. What foreign language was that translated from? And so you predictably have a bunch of tweets, DR3 stuff here, you know. Racist, 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 racist. Yeah, racist. Racist. I look at it somewhat differently. That this is insulting to black people, and it's going to become even more insulting to black people. You know, false consciousness, it used to be class-based. Now we see that it's race-based, that as a black man or woman, you are only allowed to have this view. You are only allowed to vote this way. And worst of all, this person may look black, and Winsome Sears certainly looks a lot more black than Michael Eric Dyson, but you're not really black. Okay, them's fighting words. They really are. So my advice to Joy Ann Reid and Michael Eric Dyson and like is just keep it up. Just keep it up and see where it gets you. I know where it's going to get them. With the percentage of black people voting for the Republican Party rising significantly. And let's see what Jim Kunstler has to say today. His column is called Woke Gets Whacked, but Hold the Victory Lap. It begins to look like the 2021 elections put a decisive end to the woke Jacobin progressive reign of terror and its demonic efforts to cancel the authority of truth in human affairs, truth being derived from reality. For years, in an ever-escalating campaign of coercion, persecution, and punishment, the WJPs made their own reality-optional truth and foolishly expected the nation to roll over for it. On Tuesday, voters all over the land, in effect, whapped the party of chaos upside its head with 30 inches of number 6 rebar and said no more. Days later, the wokesters are still seeing stars and planets blink in their temporal lobes. The woke race module, namely critical race theory, the principle that American society is hopelessly and systemically racist and the white people need to be punished for it. The school board and its political allies denied that this doctrine of Marxist identity politics was being worked into the curriculum. They were lying, of course, and stupidly, because it was very easy to prove. Kunstler continues, now I'm going to tell you succinctly what is behind critical race theory, and it's going to hurt. After 60-odd years of civil rights policy and legislation, a sizable cohort of African Americans are not making it in this society, and white WJPs, aka liberals, are stricken with guilt and shame at the failure of their efforts to uplift this group and heal the world. So they've teamed up with the nation's race hustlers to construct a scaffold of excuses for why this is so. The actual reasons for why this is so are taboo, namely liberal deconstruction of American family life, unwillingness to prescribe behavioral norms, and self-sabotaging cultural choices, such as the failure to promote the teaching of language skills as a primary task of public education, because ghetto English is more stigmatizing and economically disabling than skin color or any other feature of self-presentation, unless you are a professional comedian. That's the cold, hard reality, and that is what needs to change, but it won't change as long as race hustling, making money off the excuses, is considered okay. Too many Americans see through the WJP sex and race nonsense and are now voting to evict it from the public square and run it out of the halls of power, at least at the state and local level. For now, though, it remains entrenched at the national level in Washington, where it receives huge support from the very well-paid permanent bureaucracy that administers bad social policy. The 2021 election results suggest that the woke Democrats will be run out of Congress and the White House in 2022 if the USA can make it there without cracking up, which remains painfully uncertain under the toils of COVID-19. And I'm just looking something up here. I was looking up Fran Lebowitz. Yeah, that's the name, Fran Lebowitz. She wrote two books, there were two collections of her essays, Metropolitan Life, which came out in 1978, and Social Studies, which came out in 1981. And they were collected in the Fran Lebowitz Reader in 1994. And I remember in one of her essays, she mocked those writers. You know, they'd be living, I don't know, in some fabulous apartment on Park Avenue or whatever. And there was their writing area, the writing room with this view of Central Park. And she said she'd heard some writers say, "Oh, I just can't write here." And she responded mockingly, "If you can't write here, then where can you write?" Of course, after Fran Lebowitz's second collection, Social Studies, came out in 1981, there was silence. And yes, she was going to write the great American novel, which is a big, big mistake. Big mistake. No. How about you write a novel? Because let's assume you're going to write, a few of them. You write a novel and you think it's good and it gets published. And then later, people will decide whether it is a great American novel or not. I mean, the number of writers who have wrecked themselves, I'm going to be like Saul Bellow. No. Why don't you just be yourself? And again, publish something you think is good and wait for time to decide whether it is a great American novel. Now, what else we got? I thought this was a good point was made here. This is the Remnant posting Substack. How anti-woke influencers enable wokeness. Whoa, that sounds positively Chestertonian, doesn't it? Woke politics have been pushed so far into the mainstream political discourse that the topic has become unavoidable, not only because of its advocates, but also its most vocal opponents. The negative attention has become a real problem for the political left. A cottage industry of anti-woke content has arisen over the course of the past decade, becoming nearly as ubiquitous as wokeness itself. At a campaign event for failed Democratic candidate Terry McAuliffe, Barack Obama described culture war discourse as fake outrage. Obama isn't usually one to eschew a culture war dialectic. He has famously waded into social activism on numerous occasions. The real reason for his condemnation of culture war nonsense should be obvious: political expedience. On the left, the backlash to these issues has fomented political anxiety. So it's only natural that left-wing politicians would try to downplay controversial issues, such as the apparent cover-up of student sexual assaults by the Loudoun County School Board. Many career anti-woke commentators also feel anxiety over negative attention dictated at the left, rather than momentarily downplay it for political expedience. These people have adopted a posture of opposing the issues entirely, but do they really? When we look closer at the motivations of certain anti-wokes, it becomes clear that they're not really against the left, they're just ashamed of it. The effect of this temporary embarrassment on serious opposition can range from simply producing weak results to outright sabotaging the efforts of others, but it also serves to confuse the culture war discourse. Simply being ineffective isn't the worst sin imaginable, but it's worth covering in brief, if only to better recognize it. One hallmark of temporary embarrassment is the why I left the left routine, a supposed renunciation of one's left-wing views. The preeminent example of this phenomenon is Dave Rubin's aptly titled video, Why I Left the Left, hosted by PragerU in early 2017. Rubin, an alum of the left-wing outlet The Young Turks, briefly lays out some basic points for us. 1, the left is no longer liberal. I'm actually the tolerant and open-minded one. 2, I thought leftists cared about oppressed people, but now I think they're the real racists. And 3, the left is against the open marketplace of ideas. If we just have a reasonable conversation, we can all get along. The problem with these points is that they don't really oppose the left's moral frame and instead come off more like attempts at tone policing or one-upping. I am more sensible being left-wing than those other lefties over there. I'm uncomfortable with their ways of expressing their ideas. Why bring up Rubin's video from 2017? Simple. With the power of hindsight, we can see the results of these ineffective talking points. His wokeness gotten more persuasive or less persuasive since then. Being that Rubin made his anti-woke debut through PragerU, an ostensibly right-wing outlet, it's also worth noting that Rubin now identifies as a conservative. Golly, didn't see that coming. So has this rhetorical strategy evolved since Dave left the left? It's plain as day that woke politics have propagated into the American mainstream more than ever, to the point that they're present in surface-level discourse. But what does it look like when someone adopts Rubin's rhetorical approach in an actual confrontation with leftist activists? We can see these ineffective strategies at play in a recent exchange between Brett Weinstein, another anti-woke, and a group of leftist activists on a voice chat app called Clubhouse. Weinstein himself, an avowed left-winger, was once a professor at Evergreen State College in Washington. After criticizing changes to the school's day of absence tradition, Weinstein was ousted by threats from activists in early 2017. Apparently, Brett hasn't learned much from his attempts to have reasonable discussions with the activists at Evergreen or his subsequent foray into anti-woke commentary. When challenged to explain whether or not he's anti-racist, transphobic, or anti-black, Weinstein begins by immediately buying into the rhetorical frame, entering the leftist funhouse of emotional blackmail and magic words. Quote, "I'm not a classical liberal, I'm an actual liberal. Far left, have been my whole life, thoroughly anti-racist by any normal definition, but I don't like Kendi's definition of anti-racist. It doesn't make sense to me. I'm not, by any stretch of the imagination, a white supremacist. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure I even qualify as white. I'm Jewish," unquote. The conversation goes on like this, with the activists eventually claiming that evolutionary biology, Brett's own scientific discipline, is equivalent to eugenics, and demanding that Brett should Venmo them money even as they berate him. Weinstein remains on the back foot the entire time for one simple reason. All of these activist talking points are, at some level, concerns for Weinstein himself. So instead of arguing against the claims themselves, he ends up quibbling about the best way to address their grievances. The strategy for someone who actually opposes these people would be to ask if their claims about systemic racism are even true to begin with, and then go from there. But disaffected leftists like Brett simply don't have the will to do this. Debate is only as good as the people who engage in it, and bad faith actors defeat the purpose of engagement. But bad faith isn't exclusive to the woke side. Very well put. I'm going to be moving shortly to the book club, and I'm just going to open some tabs here. So I'm going to take another look at the chat before I move on to the book club. Just give me a minute here, and I will have my tabs open. I've got just one more to go. There we go. So let's go back to the chat now. Yeah, this classical liberal routine, it's so funny. How can you attack me? I'm a classical liberal. Okay, what does the chat have to say? Time Life CNN, what? Woke, the American epic poem, says Yo Mama Joke, the great American novel. Ogan's Iron says, must say that the events of the past 2 years and understanding what the global homos have in store for us in the West, I understand better third world or complaints about multinationals, IMF, World Bank, etc. Kunstler wrote a couple of stupid things today. That first sentence, oi, and apparently, okay, yeah. So that says Anne Run. Okay, let's talk about IQ, all right? We can talk about criminality, if you like. Let's compare the situation of Black people in America, say circa 1920. to, I don't know, today, or even, as recently as, say, 1970. What Kunstler has to say is true. That there were norms enforced, behavioral norms that were enforced. And I suppose a large part of the problem is that when segregation disappeared, I mean, officially in the South and unofficially in the North, most of the Black people in American cities, the inner cities, as we call them, with any money or any sense, fled. They got the hell out. Why did they do that? Because they thought that living amongst white people would be more pleasant and more safe. So the very people who could be expected to enforce behavioral norms on their fellows, they were gone. Of course, at the same time, we had the growth in this belief that no, your antisocial behavior is good and necessary. So we want more of it, and we will celebrate it. We will celebrate your rap songs about your Glocks and your bitches and popping caps and all that kind of stuff, because it's transgressive. Okay. Joy Reid babbling nonsense as usual, says Dr. A Dead Name. Remember, the feds were out to pounce on Chauvin if his verdict was innocent. What happens if Kyle's verdict is not guilty, says Tricky Who. I haven't talked about the trial. Not yet. Professor Paul says, where my mom lives, there are dozens of Persian eateries. Okay, let's go to the book club. And our book today is, well, it's an excerpt, actually. It's this. You read that? Nope, I pressed on something there. It is Joseph de Maistre, The Executioner. And it is published by Penguin. It's Great Ideas series. And it is it's an edited version. It's an excerpt from what's known as the St. Petersburg Dialogues. De Maistre was born in 1753, and he died in 1821. He was a Savoyard, and Savoy is a country that no longer exists. He was half French and half Italian. He was a member of the Savoy Senate, ambassador to Russia from 1803 to 1817, and minister of state to the court at Turin. Maistre, I suppose, is the greatest champion of what is known as throne and altar conservatism. He was an ultramontanist, as Catholics say, although I'm certain he would have laughed at the ridiculous pretension that anti-Pope Francis has a personal magisterium. Maistre was not a liberal, all right? When I say that he was not a liberal, I mean that most people today are liberals. Most people who call themselves conservatives or right-wingers are liberals. He rejected the Enlightenment entirely, which makes him a very dangerous thinker. This excerpt, published by Penguin, the whole of it is available in the same translation by Richard Lebrun, The St. Petersburg Dialogues, or Conversations on the Temporal Government of Providence. The hardcover will set you back $200, but you can get the paperback for $40. The whole of it is available online, actually. maistre.uni.cx. You can find it there. I can't vouch for the translation, but yes, as I say, if you like reading things off a computer screen, there it is. To give you an idea of Maistre's influence, I'm going to read by a piece by Françoise Meltzer called Baudelaire, Maistre, and Original Sin. Baudelaire, who is my literary idol, said that Maistre had been essential to his thought. The essayist writes, Baudelaire, obsessed with original sin, turns to the hyper-Augustinian Joseph de Maistre to cathect, as it were, his unfocused guilt and his fascination with evil. It is Baudelaire's bleak view of the world that draws him to Maistre, for the latter has a dark vision that Augustine did not share, but the poet did. The concept of evil in Baudelaire frequently ends up sublating his radical binary structures, such that Satan and God are often conflated. The first poem of Les Fleurs du Mal reminds us that the devil holds the strings that move us. As Jonathan Culler has written, the Baudelaire who is fascinated by the devil has generally been seen as critics as the romantic, embarrassing Baudelaire, while the much more admired Baudelaire is the one who writes The City and who is the harbinger of modernity, as Benjamin was to argue. But I think this chronological cleavage is wrong. Baudelaire's belief in original sin and evil is there from the beginning. It is Maistre who will provide, later in the poet's career, a theological and philosophical template for understanding the role of evil and sin. The devil is embedded both in the early Baudelaire, sometimes a romantic one, and the later Baudelaire, the herald of modernity. The notion of evil is never absent from the poet's mind. Until 1852, Baudelaire was under the sway of the socialist and father of anarchy, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, who on the face of it could not have been more different than the right-wing Maistre. Yet it was Proudhon who spends a lot of time on the hypothesis of God, which he decides he has to keep, who announced that God is evil, but which he simply meant that a reliance on predetermination of the status quo will not solve the ills of poverty, disease, and social inequality. Whereas Baudelaire is typically thought of as having been on the left until just after the Revolution of 1848, and then on the right upon reading Maistre shortly thereafter. The poet, in fact, retains a lot of Proudhon's ideas on God, even as he becomes the disciple of Maistre. Baudelaire thus carries with him, and in his text, a double and contradictory vision that has gone insufficiently recognized in the numerous depictions of him, beginning, of course, with Walter Benjamin as the founder of modernity. Baudelaire writes The City less as the theoretician of modernity than as the producer of texts that perform the inevitability and need the triumph of evil. It is in this sense, I should add, that The Flowers of Evil has been misunderstood, as Baudelaire himself lamented. Though he does himself enjoy reveling in corruption and wickedness at times, there is also a way in which Baudelaire's conviction that man is by definition irrevocably sinful is confirmed in the poet's depictions of the modern capitalist industrial city. Baudelaire's depiction of debauchery is the affirmation of his deepest belief that man can never escape his sinful heritage. Baudelaire, for this reason, saw his Flowers of Evil as deeply moral, a view that he was pretty much alone in upholding. Let's see what a modern conservative Catholic has to say about the St. Petersburg dialogues. And it begins with a quotation from it. I very much miss those symposia of which the ancient world has left us several precious records. Women are pleasant, certainly. We have to live with them in order not to become barbarians. Large gatherings have their place. It is even necessary to know how to participate in them with good grace. But when one has satisfied all the duties imposed by custom, I think that it's a great thing that the men gather from time to time to have a reasoned discussion, even at the table. I don't know why we no longer follow the practice of the ancients in this regard. And that's what the St. Petersburg dialogues are. They are a series of symposia. The author comments, Count Joseph de Maistre was a counter-Enlightenment icon, an erudite politician and diplomat, an extreme enemy of human progress and freedom. He was the figurehead and spokesman of throne and altar conservatism, not the sensible, pragmatic conservatism of Edmund Burke, nor the right-wing economic liberalism inspired by Adam Smith, but that chilly ghost of the feudal past that stalked around Europe from the aftermath of the French Revolution to the death of General Franco. His dark-hearted masterpiece on the Pope is XXX rated hardcore ultra-right-wing porn. He was the Ron Jeremy of the counter-Enlightenment. Oh dear. He disposed of the argument that a legislative assembly makes better laws than an absolute monarch in a single footnote. Pat Buchanan apparently quite likes him. Penguin have chosen to titillate their readers by including some extracts from de Maistre's St. Petersburg dialogues in their Great Ideas series. Presumably On the Pope didn't lend itself to excerpting in the same way. The extracts chosen address issues like why the just suffer and the unjust prosper, and why war was not merely part of the human experience, but was regarded as a noble and glorious thing. De Maistre observes that an alien learning about human society for the first time would expect the executioner to be revered as a noble figure and the soldier to be despised as a savage. The pieces are set in Tsarist Russia or else, and presumably derive their dialogic form from Plato, that other great enemy of freedom. Few modern readers, even those of a conservative or religious cast of mind, will feel able to accept at full strength de Maistre's ideas about original sin, divine punishment, and the workings of providence, still less his racism, sexism, and social snobbery. This is a man who believed, some distance into the 19th century, in the literal existence of Adam and Eve and in Noah's flood. Few readers, too, will relish his darker and more dystopian passages, quote, "Thus from the maggot up to man, the universal law of the violent destruction of living things is unceasingly fulfilled. The entire earth, perpetually steeped in blood, is nothing but an immense altar on which every living thing must be immolated without end, without restraint, without respite, until the consummation of the world," unquote. Our essayist, admin, concludes de Maistre's ideas are interesting from a historical perspective, but his works are less valuable for the content of their thought than for their mood music. In their ethos and culture, they are a kind of more sinister and politicized version of a Jane Austen novel. They evoke a lost world of impeccable courtly manners, religious piety, aristocracies, and hangmen. And they provoke a real feeling of gratitude that we've had the good fortune to be born in an enlightened liberal democracy. Well, let's see. So apparently, de Maistre believed in the literal existence of Adam and Eve and in Noah's flood. Well, I'm going to make a confession to you, my dear viewers and listeners. I have now reached the point where I would sooner believe in the literal existence of Adam and Eve and in Noah's flood than in such just so stories as the Big Bang, Darwinian evolution, or even more ridiculous things such as string theory and the multiple universes theory. We see, oh yes, we live under the dictates of science. Do we? Oh, do we now? We see that just as what John Roberts or Justice Barrett or whoever will decide what the Constitution means, apparently the CDC and the WHO and the Robert Koch Institute, they decide what science is. When the CDC decides to change the definition of what a vaccine means, well, that must be science because a bunch of bureaucrats have said so. Increasingly, I reject the scientific view of the world as unavailing. Of course, you could call it scientism if you like. That's the sense in which Burnham looked at this rejection. But science has become scientism because scientists are men, after all. And I've come to the conclusion that not only that the age of reason is over, but the Enlightenment was entirely a mistake for the reason that irrationality cannot be met with reason. It cannot be met with dialectic and only can be met with force. So with that said, let's look at some examples from this. And injustice. I'll tell you again, says the Count, I've never understood this eternal argument against providence drawn from the misfortune of the just and the prosperity of the wicked. If the good man suffered because he is good and the wicked prospered precisely because he is wicked, the argument would be incontrovertible. It falls to the ground once one assumes that good and evil are distributed indifferently to all men. But false opinions resemble counterfeit money, which is struck by great scoundrels and then circulated by honest people who perpetuate the crime without knowing what they are doing. It was impiety that first made much ado with this objection, and through frivolity and flippancy have repeated it. There is, in truth, nothing to it. I come back to my first comparison. A good man is killed in war. Is this an injustice? No, it is a misfortune. If a man has gout or kidney stones, if his friend betrays him, if he is wiped out by the collapse of a building, etc., these again are misfortunes, but nothing more, since all men without distinction are subject to these sorts of accidents. Never lose sight of this great truth, that a general law, if it is not unjust for all, cannot be so for the individual. You do not have a particular illness, but that you could have it. You have it, but you could have been exempt. The one who perished in a battle could have escaped. The one who returned could have fallen there. All are not dead, but all went there to die. So no more injustice. The just law is not that which affects everyone, but that which is made for everyone. The effect on such and such an individual is no more than an accident. To find difficulties in this order of things, we must love difficulties for their own sake. Unfortunately, we do love them and look for them. The human heart, continually in revolt against the authority that constrains it, tells tales to the mind which believes them. We accuse Providence to be dispensed from accusing ourselves. We raise against Providence difficulties that we would blush to raise against a sovereign or a simple administrator whose wisdom we can appreciate. How strange! It is easier for us to be just to men than to God. Yes, when I say that Maestro was a Christian, it means something very different. It meant something very different in the past than it does today. Most Christians today, they'd like the world to be a better place. Well, don't we all? Of course, there are limits on human goodness because of original sin, and very few Christians today believe in original sin. But of course, those people who, if you believe in original sin, if you don't believe in original sin, this is a binary division. And I can't imagine how the people who believe in original sin can talk to those who don't, and vice versa. But going back to science or scientism, one of the characters in these dialogues says this with regard to, oh yes, as I mentioned the other day, this humorist, so-called putative humorist, oh, the truck driver, how can he criticize CRT when he couldn't, give us a paragraph about what it means? Meister says, it is one of my favorite ideas that the upright man is commonly enough warned by an interior feeling of the falsehood or truth of certain propositions before any analysis, often even without having the necessary studies to examine them with a complete knowledge of the case. So, I should go back to the beginning. There's a lovely description. Certainly the translation by Richard Lebrun is quite beautiful. And it is of St. Petersburg. At the end of a very warm day in the month of July 1809, it was returning up the Neva in a launch with Privy Councillor T, a member of the Senate of St. Petersburg, and Chevalier de B, a young Frenchman who had been driven to this capital by the storms of the revolution in his country and by a series of bizarre events. Reciprocal esteem, a congruence of tastes, and some valuable relationships of service and hospitality had formed an intimate connection between us. Both of them were accompanying me that day to the country house where I was passing the summer. Although situated within the walls of the city, it was nevertheless far enough from the center to be called country and to offer solitude. For much remains to be done before all the area within the city walls of St. Petersburg is built up. Even though the open spaces to be found in the inhabited part are being filled in, it is still impossible to foresee whether the inhabitants will ever be able to advance to the limits traced by Peter the Great's bold finger. It was a little after 9 in the evening. The sun was setting, the weather superb. The soft breeze that was pushing us died in the sail we had seen flapping. The flag on the imperial palace, which announced the presence of the sovereign, soon fell limply along its supporting staff, heralding the stillness of the air. Our sailors took up their oars. We asked them to row slowly. Nothing is rarer, nothing is more enchanting than a beautiful summer evening in St. Petersburg. Whether the length of the winter or the rarity of these nights, which gives them a particular charm, renders them more desirable, or whether they are really so, as I believe, they are softer and calmer than evenings in more pleasant climates. The sun, which in more temperate zones sinks quickly in the west, leaving behind it only a brief twilight, here slowly brushes an earth it seems regretful to leave. Its disk, surrounded with reddish haze, rolls like a fiery chariot over the dark forests that crown the horizon, and its rays, reflected in the windows of the palaces, give the spectator the impression of a vast conflagration. Great rivers usually have deep beds and steep banks that give them a wild appearance. The Neva falls full to its banks through the heart of a magnificent city. Its limpid waters skirt the grass of the islands it embraces, and through the entire extent of the city, the river is contained by two granite embankments aligned as far as the eye can see, a kind of magnificence repeated along the three canals that go through the capital, and of which neither model nor imitation is to be found anywhere else. 1,000 boats cross and furrow the water in every direction. In the distance, foreign vessels are furling their sails and dropping their anchors. They bring tropical fruit and the products of the whole world to this northern city. Brilliant American birds sail the Neva with orange groves. On arriving, they find coconuts, pineapples, lemons, and all the fruits of their native land. Opulent Russians soon lay hands on the riches that have been presented to them, and without counting, they throw their money to the avid merchants. And we go shortly from there to discussion of the nature of evil and of the evildoer. Without openly sharing our feelings, we were enjoying the pleasures of the beautiful spectacle that surrounded us, when abruptly Chevalier de B broke the silence, exclaiming, "I would like to have here in this boat with us one of those perverse men born for society's misfortune, one of those monsters that weary the earth." "And what would you do if he accommodated you?" That was the question the two friends asked, speaking at the same time. "I would ask him," the Chevalier replied, "if the night appeared as beautiful to him as it does to us." The Chevalier's exclamation pulled us out of our reverie. Soon his original idea engaged us in the following conversation, of which we were far from foreseeing the interesting consequences. The Count says, "My dear Chevalier, perverse hearts never have beautiful nights or beautiful days. They can amuse themselves, or rather divert themselves, but they never know real enjoyment. I do not believe them capable of experiencing the same sensations that we experience. In any case, God keep them away from our boat." The Chevalier responds, "So you believe the wicked are not happy? I too would like to believe this. However, every day I hear how they succeed in everything. If this were really the case, I would be a bit angry that Providence should have reserved the punishment of the wicked and the reward of the just entirely for the other world. It seems to me that a little on account for one and the other, even in this life, would not hurt anything. This is what makes me wish, as you have just seen, that the wicked were not susceptible to the sensations that delight us. I admit to you that I do not see this question very clearly. Surely you must tell me what you think, you, sirs, who are so learned in this kind of philosophy. As for me, raised in camps since in my childhood, I always leave the task of vengeance to heaven. I admit to you again that I am not too well informed as to the way it pleases God to exercise his justice. To tell you the truth, though, it seems to me, on reflecting about what happens in the world, that if he punishes in this life, he at least does not press the matter." The Count responds, "Since you so desire, we might well devote the evening to the examination of this question, which is not so difficult in itself, but which has been muddled by the sophisms of pride and her eldest daughter, irreligion. I greatly regret those symposia, of which, yes, and we've heard that before. I do not know why we do not imitate the ancients more in this point. We no longer have, it seems to me it would be quite a good idea to sit Bacchus and Minerva down at the same table, one to defend the libertine, the other to be the pedant. We no longer have Bacchus. Moreover, our little symposium expressly rejects him. However, we have a much better Minerva than the ancients. Let us invite her to have tea with us. She is sociable and dislikes noise. I do hope she will come." And Maestra argues, or inter alia, that the executioner is essential to civilization. I believe you too accustomed to reflection, gentlemen, not to have thought often about the executioner. So who is this inexplicable being who, when there are so many pleasant, lucrative, honest, and even honorable professions in which you could exercise his strength or dexterity to choose among, has chosen that of torturing and putting to death his own kind? Are this head and this heart made like our own? Do they contain anything that is peculiar and alien to our nature? For myself, I have no doubt about this. In outward appearance, he is made like us. He is born like us. But he is an extraordinary being, and for him to be brought into existence as a member of the human family, a particular decree was required, a fiat of creative power. He is created as a law unto himself. And yet all greatness, all power, all subordination rests on the executioner. He is both the horror and the bond of human association. Remove this incomprehensible agent from the world, and in a moment order gives way to chaos, thrones fall, and society disappears. God, who is the author of sovereignty, is therefore also the author of punishment. He has suspended our earth on these two poles, for the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and he has set the world upon them. There is then in the temporal sphere a divine and visible law for the punishment of crime. This law, as stable as the society it upholds, has been executed invariably since the beginning of time. Evil exists on the earth and acts constantly, and by a necessary consequence, it must constantly be repressed by punishment. All over the globe, what we see is the constant action of all governments stopping or punishing criminal outrages. The sword of justice has no sheath. It must always be threatening or striking. For whom are there knouts, gallows, wheels, and stakes? For criminals, obviously. Judicial errors are exceptions that do not upset the rule. Moreover, I have a number of reflections to propose to you on this point. In the first place, these fatal errors are far less frequent than is imagined. Public opinion is always opposed to authority whenever there is the least room for doubt, so it avidly welcomes the least rumors of purported judicial murder. 1,000 individual passions can add to this general trend, but from long experience, I swear to you, Senator, that it is an excessively rare thing for a court to put someone to death through passion or error. This is I find this quite brilliant, actually, that Maestra, of course, was arguing for authority, for an authority which proceeds from providence. It's an unpopular opinion these days, but I suspect will become more popular as the bankruptcy of the age of reason becomes more apparent. So those are my thoughts on the executioner, which you can get for Penguin. But as I mentioned previously, you can find the whole of the St. Petersburg dialogues in English on the internet. So let's have a final look at the chat. Tricky Who says, yes, we saw that. Texas Feral Hog says, King Lear foolishly giving away his power is what led to his destruction. Americans today don't understand this. It is this wisdom that created our great free civilization. Its loss is our destruction. Dionysus, acting the pedant, says Bacchus is not Dionysus. Religion is like fireflies, which can only exist in darkness. Well, you know, what Boethius said, you know, we're like the bird coming out of the darkness and briefly enters a lighted room and then out into the darkness again. William Hicks says, Kevin, you've been able to see the film Russian Ark. The character of French Marquis seems very similar to this writer. No, I have not, but I will see it as soon as it is possible. What is original sin? Says a Texas Feral Hog. The original sin was the sin of Adam. Adam was given paradise, and he threw it all away by eating from the tree of knowledge. And thus all the descendants of Adam are cursed by this original sin. That is the doctrine, in short. If you want to look at this, you know, in Augustinian, you know, it's the basis of conservatism, really, of the conservative way, the realistic way, the tragic view of life. The people who are supposed to be the punishers, district attorneys and the like, they don't believe in evil. They don't believe in original sin. They believe there's something went wrong in the brain and the wiring of the brain, or these people had miserable upbringings or something. People don't have agency, so it would be cruel to hold them accountable for their actions. I mean, this is a disastrous way of looking at the world, as we have seen. Okay, KMG sounds like Alan Bloom in his The Closing of the American Mind, says Dionysus. Baudelaire, KMG, what do you think of Céline? I reviewed, as Enron points out, I reviewed his wartime trilogy, Castle to Castle, North, and Rigadoon. We need to get Kevin a Kindle or something so he isn't always reading right off this computer. It is much easier to read off the computer because it's right in front of me than to, look down at the Kindle. Yeah, much, much easier. Italian monarchy was the House of Savoy, points out Chogo 666. Just so. Okay. Oh, Paucaso 88 says, watch the first 2 episodes of Babylon Berlin last night. Now I know to never hide in an outhouse during a gunfight. Gross. It worked, didn't it? Respectable commenting name says, classical liberal. Isn't that what libertarians call themselves? Well, David A. French, no less, outed himself, said classical liberal. These people should be sued for false advertising. All of these people in the so-called conservative movement. Oh, we're conservatives. We're conservatives. No, actually, we're now going to admit that we were classical liberals all along, which is at the antipodes to conservatism. Okay, so that's it. That's it for today and for this week. What is coming up? As I say, Monday, I can't promise, but I'm getting much, much closer to being able to unveil the non-Cripsis cast. And next week on Theater Thursday, I'm talking about David Mamet's 1991 film Homicide, which is about police work. It's about race relations in the United States. And I suppose particularly it's about the experience of being a secular Jew in the United States. And on the book club next week, I'm going to talk about, where did you go? Where did you go? Yeah, that's not working out for me there for some reason. Let's just go to the profile here because this is always at the top. It is always at the top. And book club. Oh, yes. One of the great novels, Robert Louis Stevenson's A Treasure Island. And I guess Robert Louis Stevenson, he founded single-handedly the pirate cult. No joke. And the book club, not the book club music, on Monday, November the 8th, I'm going to be talking about the cult of the performer. So Monday, look, I have to, these problems with my father's estate just go on and on and on and on. And the lawyer handling it, I'm not an executor, but the lawyer handling it is in Victoria, and I may be forced to doorstop this man near the end of the working day to see whether there can be some action on this. And this would require me not doing a show on Monday. I'll let you know. But no, this is, I committed myself to doing shows 5 days a week, but the business of my father's estate, this has to be settled. I mean, other people have got their share, but not me. Okay, so if you'd like to make a donation to the live stream, which would be really terribly well appreciated now, given my, given all the difficulties I'm going through now. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, donations may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.